Hello, and thanks for joining me for Fall is for Planning and Planting an Energy-Saving Landscape. I'm Melinda Myers, horticulturist and gardening expert, and we're going to chat about how you can design landscape features to help reduce your energy costs. I always like to thank my sponsors as I start every webinar. They allow me to provide this information free of charge for all of you. We Energies has been sponsoring not only this webinar, but other webinars, activities, and videos that we've been providing throughout the summer to help you create a budget-wise and beautiful landscape. I also want to thank Milwaukee Public Library for hosting this webinar. They've been great partners in this and other projects with other sponsors as well. And thanks to the public libraries across the state of Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for their participation. They've been helping to share this information with patrons, provide additional information. If you haven't been to your local library, do so. Lots of great resources, lots of great activities. They're there to help you learn more and inspire us all to be better citizens and help us to keep learning. So when we look at energy conservation, there are a lot of things we can do, but I'm going to focus on landscaping. This is where I have some expertise. And so we're going to look at how we can use plants to modify the climate around our homes. The idea is to reduce heat gain, that sun shining on the roof and into our windows in the summer that require more air cooling, and to reduce heat loss in the winter, especially for those of us in colder climates, because we don't want our heating to go out the window doors and other parts of our home. Landscaping properly can help us save as much as 30% on our annual energy bill. And that's a pretty big savings. Not only is it good for our budgets, but it's also good for the environment. Now, if you live in an area that's prone to wildfires, you also need to consider landscaping to keep your house safe and reduce the risk of wildfires on your property. So I'm going to focus on landscaping for those of us that aren't in wildfire-prone landscapes, but there are some things you can learn from this webinar if you are. And one of the things, there are links to wildfire landscaping resources on the handout. So be sure to check the handout. There are lots of links, not only to this, but other information on energy savings, plantings, and other things to help you design a great energy saving landscape. Always call 811 or file online before putting the first shovel or even a trowel into the ground. Utilities can shift over time with weather, from erosion from soil. They could be nearer the surface. Also, construction and work you have done on your house. Call at least 3 business days. 811 is the national US and Canadian number you can call. On your handout is a link to Digger's Hotline for those of you in Wisconsin, and also a link to finding your local energy or underground utility locating service. It's a free service. They contact utility companies that may have underground utilities in your work zone. They contact them to come and mark them. It's the law, but also it's about keeping you safe. You hit an underground utility, you can be injured or even killed. It's about avoiding inconvenience. You hit the cable line, you knock it out, no one's going to be happy with you. And it saves you money because if you have not called at least 3 business days before putting that first digging item, piece of equipment or tool into the ground, you're responsible for the repair. And I'd rather spend my money on plants and paying to fix a utility bill. So be safe, save money, and give them a call at least 3 business days before you start digging. Avoid interference with plants and overhead utilities. The arborists don't want to come out. Those tree care professionals hired by the utility companies don't like butchering your trees to keep them clear of utility lines. That's not why they got into this profession. But we've all heard the importance of keeping trees and other vegetation away from overhead utilities. The risk of fire, the risk of danger to children. Kids climb the tree and then they can come in contact with utility line. So keep your landscape looking its best, and then reduce the interference or the conflict of trees and tall plantings with utility lines. If you go to We Energies, for those of you in the We Energy service area, I have a link to their website and to this page that shows the distance from planting near overhead utilities. If you're in other areas with other utility services, you may want to check with them. But this is pretty standard for most. So the measurements go from the outer arms of the poles, and that's the distance you want to keep. So low-growing shrubs, about 12 feet. Low-growing trees 20 feet and shorter, between 12 and 24 feet away. The taller the plant, the further from the utility line. So, keep your plants looking their best, be safe, and follow these guidelines. You need to start, or I'd recommend you start by evaluating the existing environment. The recommendations I'm going to give you are general recommendations based on the way air typically flows across the country and the way the sunlight travels in the summer and in the winter. But especially if you live in an urban or suburban area, there may be buildings that are influencing the light patterns and the wind patterns. And out in the country, your plantings and neighbors. So take some time to evaluate not only sunlight at the time you're looking at it, summer or winter, but throughout the year, throughout the day, and the same with the winds. I'm going to talk generalities, but this will help you fine-tune your plantings for your specific landscape. Planting deciduous trees that shade the roof and windows in the summer is very helpful. And we really like to place those trees so they're shading the roof, not hanging over the roof. If they hang over the roof, you have leaf litter in the gutters, you have a potential hazard if a branch falls or the tree's blown over in the storm. So we want the trees, the small and large trees, and even larger shrubs, shading those windows, and the larger trees shading the roof so that we reduce heat gain in the summer. Now, we want to look at where the sunlight comes, typically east to west, right? The sun rises in the east, sets in the west, very much in the summer. Now, those of you in the south may want to extend that shading to the southeast and southwest. Kind of, again, look at the sunlight patterns in your landscape during the summer. But in the winter, most of us want that heat gain from solar heat coming in. So deciduous plants, those that drop their leaves, allow more light through to warm the house. So again, we're trying to minimize heat gain in the summer by our plantings. And then when you're selecting your trees, think about what they look like in the summer and in the winter. Here's Kentucky Coffeetree. It has bipinnately compound leaves. These are twice dissected leaves. Each little leaflet is small, but together they make a leaf that's like 3.5 feet long. So it provides lots of shade in the summer, but when the leaves drop off in the winter, it's more open and those branches are much finer than, say, a bur oak. I love oak trees and they're wonderful providing shade. And this bur oak on the left is really providing a nice shady atmosphere for those hostas below. But when you look at it in the winter, they're much coarser branches. And so that's going to cast more shade in the winter. So again, keeping in mind, we want that sun warming our home in the winter, but shading those trees, shading it in the summer. The other thing we can do is try to manage the wind. Now, this is from the National Arbor Day Foundation, and there's a link to their website in your handout. And a couple things we want to keep in mind. One is you obviously need a lot of space to do a planting like this. So those of you with small city lots, stay with me. I was a small city gardener for 26 years, and there was no way I could plant an evergreen windbreak like this. But those of you in suburban or rural areas may have more space and be able to do this. So 1 or 2 rows of evergreens or a mix of evergreens and deciduous plantings, at least 1 to 2 heights, 1 to 2 heights away, within 1 to 2 heights of the mature size of those trees near the house. And the reason is, watch how the winds are going to go up and over those trees and beyond the house. So the idea is to divert the wind away from your home. You also want to be careful, though, as that wind goes over those evergreens, it's going to drop snow on the downwind side. So keep those trees at least 1 to 3 tree heights away from walks, drives, and the roof of the house. So it's that fine line of diverting the wind away from your home, but not directing snow towards it. And that can make a great impact on heat loss in the winter. Those of you in milder climates are also going to use windbreaks maybe to direct warm winds away when you don't want those warming your landscape in summer. Now, you can use evergreens around smaller spaces, again, like they've done here with this patio to provide some shelter and shading. Again, think about where the shade's being cast and where the wind is going to go. So let's talk about proper tree planting. Healthy plants are critical because it's going to take them a few years to reach the size to shade the roof of your house or create that windbreak. So we need to start with healthy plants purchased from a quality nursery or garden center. And then we're going to want to get them home safely. You know, often I see trees sticking out of the back of the trunk and the canopy whipping in the wind. So whether you transport it or the nursery, be sure to wrap the canopy of the tree to protect it from bouncing in the wind on the trip home. You can see next to the one employee that they've wrapped that whole evergreen to protect those needles from desiccation from wind. Now, you may want to invest a little extra money and have the nursery deliver your tree, especially larger ones, right to your home. And many, if you prepare the planting hole, will set them right in the hole for you. But if you're going to transport it, you want to make sure you secure those trees, whether it's in the bed of your truck, in a trailer, or the trunk of your car. By securing them, they're not going to move around as much, so less likely to rub on different parts of the trunk and the tailgate and the trailer. And you're also going to want to wrap that trunk, especially where the trunk is leaning against the tailgate or the edge of the trunk or the gate of the trailer. Because as you're driving, it's going to move and you don't want to damage that trunk. You've just spent a lot of money buying a beautiful tree for your landscape. So you want to keep it healthy on the ride home. Once you're home or before you even pick out your plant, because you need to determine where you're going to plant it before you call 811, I'd mark that planting hole. My friend Mark gave me this suggestion. What he does is he puts a post, either a rebar or a T-post, where he's going to plant that tree, take some twine, so he's making that planting hole, and then runs it around in a circle. And that helps me when I'm digging, because you get digging and you kind of lose track of where was I starting and where's that middle of that hole. And that helps you make sure you make that planting hole at least 2 to 5 times wider than the root ball of the tree you're planting. Research has found that by digging that hole and roughening up the sides, that's really allowing those roots to penetrate the surrounding soil and get kind of a head start into the soil beyond the planting hole. You're going to have to find the root flare, often called the trunk flare on the tree. And so basically you can see I pulled the burlap away and I started pulling the soil back from the trunk. And you can see that wet spot where the soil line originally was. And then as I pulled it away, I looked for the root flare, and that's where the major tree roots kind of slope away or flare away from the trunk of the tree. This should be at or slightly above the soil surface. So I had to go digging a little bit to get to that point. Then we're going to measure from the root flare to the bottom of the root ball, and that's how deep we're going to plant our tree. We don't want to dig the hole deeper than that distance from the root flare to the bottom of the root ball, because what happens when we dig soil, it settles eventually, right? And if you dig the hole deeper, there's chances your tree will settle, then you'll have an indentation, water will collect and lead to root rot. And so I like to use a handle of a shovel and a handle of another shovel to measure that planting hole. So we're going to make that hole deepest in the center, right? The distance from the root flare to the bottom of the root ball, and then it's going to get shallower to the sides. And then once you dig that hole, you're going to want to roughen up the sides. Those of you with clay soil especially have probably noticed when you dig that hole, it makes a glazed edge and the roots have a hard time penetrating. So I like to take an iron rake and just roughen up the sides, or you may use your shovel. You want to just break up that glaze so the roots have a good shot at going through the planting hole, from the planting hole to the soil beyond. When you're moving your tree, make sure to move it by the root ball. This was a big, heavy tree, and my friend Mark lent a hand. We used his ball cart to get it to near the planting hole, or you could use a wheelbarrow. And then we rolled it by the root ball. I see too many people grab the trunk and try to lift the tree and place it in the hole, and then you end up damaging the roots. And again, you've paid a lot of money for this tree, and you want to get it off to a good start. So we carefully rolled it into the planting hole. And then position it, right? You want to make sure that the tree has the good size facing the direction that you prefer. You know, there's always a good side and a not as good side. And so do you want that good side to the public or to your home? It's up to you, but now's the time to make that change. You may also want to make sure you get all the tags off the tree as well. Now, I'm a big fan, and most arborists are, of removing the wire baskets. I've seen too many trees that have failed where some of the large structural roots were girdled by the wire basket. I also like to remove the burlap. Some burlap's biodegradable, but when it's covered with soil, I often find it doesn't degrade very quickly. And again, it captures the roots, preventing them to explore the soil beyond. You may need to check your guarantee from the nursery. Some nurseries will not guarantee these trees if you remove the burlap and the wire cage, and then you have to make a decision. I have to tell you, I was teaching a maintenance class at our technical college when I was an instructor there, and I talked about this, and I had a couple people from landscape companies arguing with me about this. And I said, I get it. Go check some of those tree plantings you've made a couple years ago. They both came back and said, you know what? You're right. We still found some burlap above the soil surface and some twine, and the wire baskets, what they could see, looked shiny and new. I have two plants by the home where I live now. They came with the house, and they were in wire baskets and burlap, and the person who planted them did not remove them, and they'd been in there a couple years. One of them, the burlap was at the soil surface and the twine was still around the trunk of the tree. So I cut back the burlap, removed the twine. I really couldn't remove the wire baskets because I wasn't sure. I figured I'd do more damage at this time than if I had been able to do it ahead of time. So I'm sure they're not going to be really long lived, but I'm hoping they'll hold out until I can get some other things done. So keep that in mind as you're planting bald and burlap trees. I'm going to talk more about container planting when we get to shrubs, and those strategies also apply to container trees. I mentioned I removed the wire basket. Usually you could kind of see it still at the bottom, so I cut it back and bend it down because the majority of feeder roots are in the top 18 inches, 12 to 18 inches of soil. So if I can get it at the bottom of the root ball, that's usually significant. And then I'm doing minimal disturbance. Then I also cut back the burlap to the bottom of the root ball. Some people will slide it out, and that's how I get it out. And then I loosen any girdling or circling roots. I may cut back those larger circling roots because they'll continue to grow in a circle if I don't either slice them to encourage them to branch out to the surrounding soil, or remove them so they don't continue to circle and eventually girdle the tree. Backfill with the existing soil. Don't amend the soil. What we find is if we amend the soil, and I know some of us are gardening in some pretty lousy soils, if we amend that soil, what happens is the roots, it's like a container in the ground, right? The roots are pretty happy there, and they tend not to explore the surrounding soil. Keep in mind that tree roots grow 2 to 5 times the height of the tree away from the trunk. And so there's no way you could amend that whole area to really get it ready for those roots. So getting it used to this existing soil is your best bet. So backfill with the existing soil. Be sure to water in. Some people water halfway through. They'll fill the planting hole halfway, water, and then fill it the rest of the way. I find I end up with a muddy mess, but find out what works best for you. And then just make sure you're at the proper level, that you do a good thorough watering. So if there are any air pockets, you could add any soil. And then mulch the soil surface, a 2 to 4 inch layer of shredded bark, wood chips. And some research has found that putting a layer of compost and then your wood mulch on top of it is even better, or your shredded leaves. So if you're doing fall planting and you've access to fall leaves, shred those with the mower, make that your first layer, and then put the wood chips or shredded bark on top. The compost and the leaves break down quickly, so they add nutrients, while the wood chips are a little slower to decompose. Make your mulch bed as big as possible. The wider the mulch bed, the further the grass and weeds are away, reduces the risk of hitting that trunk with a weed whip or the mower, easier mowing for you. And it's also good for the trees because Grass is a big competitor for water and nutrients with young trees. We had a tree on the campus when I was teaching at our technical college, and it was a catalpa tree, and my students said it looked more like a shrub. It was pretty small. And this was the spring of 1995. And so the only thing we did was expand the mulch bed. Nobody watered the tree at that point. So bigger mulch bed. We pulled the mulch away from the trunk. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And that tree put on a foot of growth, and it was basically because we reduced the competition from the surrounding lawn area and we conserved moisture with the mulch. So it makes a huge difference. It helps the tree and it makes it better for you. Pull that mulch away from the trunk of the tree. There's a couple reasons. Mulch piled over the trunk of the tree encourages trunk rot, girdling roots. It also makes easy access for voles over winter. They can kind of scurry under the mulch and then nibble on that trunk bark. So pull that back. It's better for the tree. And don't keep adding more mulch every year. You want to keep that layer no more than 4 inches deep, whether you're adding new or keeping the existing layer. That should be the maximum depth. Continue watering. We often put the tree in and think, okay, we're done, and count on rainfall. But I'll tell you, recent droughts, hot weather, and in general, trees need several years to get established. So it's important for you to monitor soil moisture, dig down 4 to 6 inches. If the soil's crumbly and starting to dry, just slightly moist, it's time to water. And trees need 10 gallons of water around that area under their tree canopy to really moisten it. So 10 gallons per 1 inch trunk of tree. So the bigger the diameter, this tree was probably 2.5 inches in diameter, maybe 3. So that's 30 gallons of water. So when that soil was dry, I needed to add 30 gallons. Now, soaker hose works great. You hook up your hose and then it puts the water right where it's needed. Some people will take 5-gallon buckets and drill holes in the bottom and then set those that you need out and about, fill those with water. They slowly moisten the soil below, and then you have the right amount of water. So whatever method, make sure you water thoroughly and as needed, and always check, especially those first couple years. This was my tree at planting, and you could kind of see a little bit of the playground to the left and the subdivision kind of to the right. And this was a buckeye. I'm from Ohio, and it was planted in honor of my mother when she passed away. And here it is 9 years later. You can't see, at least in the summer, the subdivision beyond, shading that sandbox and the swing sets over there. So I wanted it there to block the view, provide screening, but also to help shade my mom's great grandkids when they came to visit and play. Maybe you don't have room for trees. Well, training vines on the east or west side of your house, deciduous vines, can help reduce heat gain, so it's shading the walls. You want deciduous, again, especially those of us in the north, because you want to hold the heat in the winter. This homeowner has a climbing hydrangea. If you've tried growing them, they are shade tolerant. They're beautiful bloomers, but they take a long time to get established before they flower. But what's nice is they have leaves. The leaves turn yellow in the fall, orange exfoliating bark, so they add some seasonal interest. They climb just like they climb by root like holdfasts that anchor to the rough surfaces like stone or brick. Virginia creeper and Boston ivy have holdfasts, little pads that they connect to the rough surfaces. Keep in mind that what the interaction of the vine is with the surface of your house. So if you have a wood house or siding, I wouldn't recommend using those because you may have to do some maintenance on it. It can damage some wood. And some people are concerned too about the mortar when we're using some of the certain climbing vines. I have to tell you, I had a climbing hydrangea at my brick house in the city, and once it got started, it was pretty vigorous. So it needed a little trimming to keep it away from the windows. So keep that in mind. Some people will put a large trellis on the side of their house and train the vine up. And that way, leave a little space. Then you also have that dead air space we'll talk about in a minute. But if you need to do maintenance, it's climbing on the trellis. You can still get to your house. And then I've even seen trellises with hinges, so they fold down. So if you need to get in and paint, you can carefully fold down the trellis vine and all, so you maintain some of that mature growth, but you can still access the house. An attached or nearby arbor covered with a deciduous vine. This is kind of sort of nearby the house, but I thought it was a good example. I think I read about this in Colorado at Colorado State. So putting it on the east or west side to shade those windows is a great way to do that. Then the vines drop their leaves for the winter and the light's allowed to come in. The problem is if you're in a wildfire prone area, you shouldn't really have a wooden arbor against your house, and keeping plant material up on your house is very dangerous. So again, if you're in a wildfire prone area, check those landscaping recommendations before you start adding trees and shrubs to the landscape. I know green roofs aren't necessarily an option for everybody. A lot of public places are installing them. I even have seen a few residents do it. I was lucky enough to go to the rooftop garden of Chicago's City Hall. There are several places in the Milwaukee metro area. The Ford plant and in Europe was lucky enough to see quite a few. The idea of green roofs is one, they're longer lasting than your traditional asphalt. They're storm stormwater managers because the water falls onto the green roof. It's filtered through the use and filtered through plant roots and soil. There's usually a downspout that takes any excess water to a cistern or rain barrels or some other place. So it manages stormwater. It manages heat gain and heat loss, so you reduce your energy costs, and tends to be longer lasting. But as you'll see in this sign, they're heavy. So you need to make sure that whatever structure you put a green roof on, that the roof is able to support it. Here was an example of a system that's a bunch of like a shallow planting cells. Think of a flat that's a little deeper, filled with a well-drained potting mix and heat and drought tolerant plants, sedums, hens and chicks, things like that. But when that soil is moist and those planting cells are filled with plants, it's 29 pounds per square foot. That's a lot of weight. So you want to make sure the structure can hold it. This is at Fox Valley Tech in Wisconsin, and I love what they did here. They just made a green roof as a demonstration, but that's kind of a fun way to incorporate a green roof into a structure. Again, helping to absorb some of that heat gain down below while providing shade. So maybe you don't have the ability to do a huge green roof. How about your dog, a green roof dog house? If you ever joined me at We Energy Park in the last few years, you've seen our green roof dog house. And on your handout, there's a link to the plans for this. And we also, at that spot, and maybe you want a single one for your dog, but also at that spot at We Energy Park at Wisconsin Fairgrounds, we have a green roof bird feeder. And you will also find information on this and plans if you want to build your own. Now, I have to tell you, when we first did the green roof bird feeder and the dog house, I was concerned that this shallow amount of soil was able to support the plants and keep them safe from our cold Wisconsin winters. Well, the green roof bird feeder stays out all winter, just like this. And the green roof dog house, the roof stays out all winter. Now, granted, this spot is a little bit sheltered. There's a screen and planting on the west side and plants on the north, open to the east. And there's a building on the south. So it's somewhat sheltered, but it's exposed to the cold winter temperature. And I have to say the plants have done generally quite well. Maybe replacing a couple on the green roof bird feeder once in a while, every few years, but they have done great. So that was a great learning experience for me, and I wanted to pass that on to you. Now, something most people, even in small spaces, can do is a foundation planting. And the idea is to create a dead space, airspace between the plants, the foundation planting, and your house, where the air is still or very slow moving. So it's an added layer of insulation. So it reduces heat gain in the summer and heat loss in the winter. Evergreens are the best. Using a mixed planting like they've done here with perennials, deciduous shrubs, and evergreens gives you seasonal interest as well. But try to get some evergreens in there. Again, they're going to help you a lot with creating that dead space in the winter, stopping those winter winds, creating that dead space between the house and the foundation planting so you have less heat loss in the winter. Again, a nice mix, keeping in mind your plant selection. Here, these are concolor firs. This is blue cloak and just beautiful. And this is my friend Dorothy's yard. And these really provide some insulation, not only for her house, but also for the garden that lies beyond. I think this was taken in Paris or Quebec. I can't remember where I took this picture, but even apartment dwellers have found ways to use landscape plantings, one to create privacy, okay, so they don't have to see their neighbor, but also to add some shade or even create some windbreaks as well. Couple things to keep in mind if you are an apartment dweller. With plants that are in containers year round, you need to make sure the container's weatherproof, meaning it will tolerate the cold and the heat in your climate. The larger the container, the greater the insulation for the plant roots, but also the heavier. So heavier that plant when the soil's wet and the container's going to be. So make sure whatever's beneath you, if it's a balcony, that it can hold that weight, especially if you're going to add people to that. And then when you select your plants, I did my research on above ground planters and winter hardiness. And one of the things that I found through research and our experiment was that growing plants at least one zone hardier. So if you're in a zone 5, go for a plant that's at least a zone 4 or 3. So 1 or 2 zones hardier, that plant's going to better be able to survive in a container over winter because those roots are going to be exposed to cold temperatures. They don't have that mass ground to insulate them. So planting shrubs, you plant evergreens. A lot of evergreens are balled in burlap, but many are in containers. And I find a lot of trees in containers as well. So what we talk about for planting these shrubs a lot of it will apply to trees grown in containers. Proper spacing. This is a hard thing, I think, for any gardener. I was a small space gardener for 26 years. And even though I have more room now, I don't always take a tape measure with me, but I have a 4-foot lath that I mark off. I have a couple of them so that I can easily lay it between and give the proper space because those shrubs look like they're far apart, but in just a few years, they'll grow together. I had a landscape architect one time. I heard him at a lecture and he said, you know what I do? If it says plant them 4 feet apart, I recommend 2 feet. And then I tell the homeowner to take out every other shrub as those shrubs grow. Well, I'll tell you, as gardeners, we have a hard time thinning beans, let alone a shrub we've paid $50, $60 for. So plant them at the recommended space, then fill that void with ornamental grasses or native grasses or perennials or even annuals. And as those shrubs get bigger, you can move out the perennials that aren't needed anymore, put them in another garden space, or plant fewer annuals between. So you'll fill in the void, that'll help with insulation, but you won't be removing shrubs or doing lots of excess pruning. A lot of container grown plants are often really pot bound and hard to get out of the container. I'll roll my shrubs over the ground trying to loosen it. Some people will use their weed knife to cut around the edge and then slide the plant out. We don't want to yank it out by the stem, right? Because then we can damage the roots. Sometimes if it's really pot bound, I'll cut the bottom of the pot off and slice and then set it in the hole and then slice the side of the pot and peel it away. Once we remove the pot, let's take a look at those roots. Again, if they're girdled and the longer they've been in the container, the more likely you are to find roots growing in a circle. So you want to loosen those. Some people will take their weed knife and slice them. Some will use a cultivator to loosen them. If you don't loosen those circling roots, they continue to grow in a circle, even though the plant and its root ball has more room to spread. So loosen any girdling roots and locate the crown of the plant. The crown of the plant is where the stems meet the roots. So just like we found the root flare, you may need to pull it back. The planting depth for container plants is from the crown of the plant, where the roots and the stems meet, to the bottom of the root ball. That crown should be at or slightly above the soil surface. And the hole should be 2 to 3 times bit wider than the root ball. So you want to make sure, again, that those roots have a chance to kind of get going. And then if that soil's been disturbed, they found that really helps the plant roots explore the soil beyond the planting hole. Backfill with the existing soil. Now, here's one of the things to keep in mind. Often when we're doing a shrub bed or a mixed border, we've got a large planting bed. In that case, you could amend the whole planting bed, not the planting hole, but maybe you add an inch or two of compost to the soil in that whole planting bed. That's fine, but don't just add it to the planting hole. Same problem we talked about with planting trees. If you just amend that planting hole, those roots aren't going to explore the soil beyond. Be sure you're not burying the crown of the plant. Again, if you plant it too deep, the soil tends to sink, you get water collecting, and you'll have some rot occurring. And so you'll not only lose the investment of money, but also the investment of time, because they don't always die immediately. It's a couple years later, you have to replace them, and you don't want to lose that valuable time. Just like our trees, mulching is very important. Again, you may want to do some compost. Shredded leaves work great. Wood chips, either alone or on top of those. Do not put weed barrier on top below wood chips, because as those wood chips decompose, they create compost. Weed seeds and turf grow in, they go through the weed barrier, and you have a mess. If you use stone, definitely use weed barrier. I'm not a fan of weed barrier stone because most of us have lousy soils we start with. And so by using organic mulches, as those mulches break down, not only do they conserve moisture, suppress weeds, keep grass away, make mowing easier, moderate soil temperature, very important in hot summers and cold winters, but they also improve the soil. And then when you're adding more mulch, and I know people find that annoying and think of it as extra work, think of it that you're fixing the soil and you're mulching your plants. You know, you're getting a twofer in that case. Just covering the soil will help. There's been a lot of research that found that covering the soil can reduce the heat around your home by, I think, as much as 10 or 15 degrees. So ground covers, even a little bit of a healthy lawn, shrub plantings, all those things help to create a cooler environment. You know that, right? We walk out into the black top of our driveway, a patio that doesn't have shade, or a parking lot, and you know it's a lot hotter than that area in the shade of the trees, or even where in the sun, that in an area covered by plantings. And it's good for the overall health of your plants as well. This is Oldbrook. I'm pretty sure this is Oldbrook Botanic Garden. And I wanted to add this. This is a no-mow area they have, and they planted bulbs, so they have spring interest, and then they let the no-mow turf grow. I think they just cut it back once a year. No-mow turf can be mowed monthly, so it looks more like a lawn, or once a year just to kind of clean things up and have more of a meadow look. So they've used a lot of ground covering around this walkway. And your covering can be ground cover, shade tolerant, low growing perennials. And then shade the hard surfaces. And we probably do that often just for our own convenience and comfort, right? You have a patio area in the full sun. I am a sun lover, but I'll tell you, if you shade those hard surfaces near your home, you're keeping that overall area cooler. As you can see, it's shaded all over this area. Again, less heat gain for your house. Shade your air conditioner. They found that you can save 10% of energy costs by shading the air conditioner. And I love what they did here using deciduous plants. And you can see that they're kind of shading the windows as well. So they're getting some added benefit in the summer when those taller plants are leafed out. Not only are they shading the air conditioner, and it's still accessible if you have to have some maintenance done. Airflow is critical. So you got to keep your plants away far enough so you've got good airflow. But when those leaves are out, it's also shading those windows. Some people will use decorative fencing and maintain access to the transformers. I lifted this picture from the We Energies website and put a link in as well. You want to maintain access and visibility. If something happens and they need to access that transformer, it may happen at night. You may not be home. They need to be able to find it on your property. So camouflage, okay, no rocks, fake rocks over it or anything like that. At least 10 feet, keep at least 10 feet in front of the door free, and at least 3 feet on the sides. Perennials are great options because if they do have to come in and do work, it's a lot easier for you to, replace those perennials than lose a 15-year-old shrub. And then maintain access to meters as well. If they've got to come and read the meter, I know there's a lot more digital work that's being done now for reading meters, but in case they need access, make it accessible. So again, they don't have to impede on your landscape. Our library program started in April and ends this month, but we still have information on the website on growing a beautiful and budget-wise landscape. Now, seed swaps, we typically do them during the winter when we're thinking of gardening and we want to save money and share seeds, but you could do it any time of the year. So as you're packing away your seeds for the winter season, or maybe some of you are lucky enough to be planting for the winter, think about those excess seeds that you might be willing to make a trade. Grow a tomato in a pot. I know some of my southern friends can do it in late winter or may have started in the fall, but you can also try growing a tomato in a pot indoors, kind of a fun challenge. Go on a bug hunt. Kids are back in school in much of the country. And they need to get outside, and helping them go on a bug hunt. I hate to tell you, bugs are way more interesting than plants to most kids. And we have a journal on our website that you can download and help make this a fun activity. And worm composting is good all year as you turn those plant-based kitchen scraps into compost for your garden. So check it out. There's a link on your website. And speaking of kids, help me grow a gardener or two. It's very important for their health and well-being. We know how good we feel when we garden, whether it's a youngster. This is my oldest grandson. Sammy helped me do a dry riverbed to manage water on my property. He's a great digger, so that's a good job for him, but good way to put out that energy. It helps with kids with ADHD. They exhibit less symptoms. Girls raised in a landscape environment suffer less peer pressure. We all know we feel better when we pull weeds, plant plants, spend time in nature. It elevates our mood, reduces stress. Help youngsters, young families gardening for the first time. And I've met many retirees that now have an opportunity. And we gained 18 million new gardeners during COVID. If you're one of them, welcome. We're glad to have you in our community. And if you know a new gardener, share your expertise. Gardeners love to share, and it's a great way to help new gardeners along the way. Please stay in touch. All my contact information is on the handout, and I appreciate you joining me tonight and keeping in touch. If you email a question at info@melindamyers.com, be patient with me. I try to get to them as soon as possible. So please stay in touch. Visit my website for upcoming webinars. I keep recordings of past webinars on my website as well, and the handouts that you can learn from. So please stay in touch. And if I'm ever in your neck of the woods and you've been on one of my webinars, please come up and say hello. I always enjoy meeting people in person and having a face when I give in my head when I give a webinar. So thank you all so much for joining me. Thanks again to We Energies for sponsoring our library program and this webinar. We really appreciate your support so I can offer this to you for free. Thanks again to Milwaukee Public Libraries for hosting this webinar. They've been great partners for us, helping to get the information out to all of you. And thanks to the public libraries across the state of Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for their participation. Again, visit your local library. There's so much going on. I'm always impressed to see what the librarians come up with, activities for adults, children, families, the book lists they provide, and all those things to help us not only grow a better landscape, but keep learning in all areas of our life. Again, please, if you have questions, post them at info@melindamyers.com, and I'll get to them as soon as possible. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great gardening season, no matter where you garden and what time of year. Thanks again.